Barnaby Joyce, the Deputy Prime Minister, in Rocky today, saying that transition is unemployment central. Well, is it? Daniel Wild is the Director of Research at the Institute of Public Affairs, a conservative think tank. Daniel Wild, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Do you agree? Do you think that transition in Central Queensland will lead to unemployment?
Oh, absolutely. There's no question. And there's no question that North Queensland is ground zero for net zero in terms of the impact it's going to have on jobs, on industry, and on the future economy in the area. Some of our recent research identified that net zero would put about 125,000 jobs out of commission because what it means is there'll be no new coal, oil or gas projects across Australia. And this is a real issue in terms of, you mentioned the coalition being divided, but it's also a big divide in our nation between the inner cities and the regions, the outer metropolitan parts of our cities, where the cost of net zero are going to be hit the hardest.
The Labor Party this morning, Murray Watt, in fact, making the point that they've had their net zero policies modelled. They say that it won't lead to the early closure of a single coal-fired power station. Is that the case? And when we look at the jobs and the jobs on offer in Central Queensland into the future?
Look, I'm not sure that is the case. The reality is that if you're going to get to net zero, you've got to cut emissions. And where are the emissions coming from? Well, they're coming from our fossil fuel sector, which is the backbone of regional Australia and the backbone of the North Queensland economy. So there's no getting around the fact that if you're going to pursue a net zero policy, and this is, by the way, the policy of both Labor and Coalition, you're going to have to get rid of coal mines, you're going to have to get rid of our oil and gas projects, and you certainly can't proceed with any new projects. That is the key issue. And what our research has identified is across Australia, what that would mean is it would cancel 500,000 jobs and cost $274 billion to our economy, which is around 14% of our annual GDP.
Obviously, there's an expectation that if you pursue net zero emissions, yes, there would naturally be a reduction in jobs in some of those industries. But the idea is you stem that, or you provide alternative jobs in things like hydrogen, production of renewable energy, of boosting our manufacturing that would be powered by renewable energy. Is there clearly an opportunity there to have different jobs in Central Queensland?
Well, that's not what's happened so far. And it's an interesting point that you raised, and it's something that a lot of people mention. But what we do know, looking at recent history, is those new jobs are not coming online. And so, just to give you one example, over the last decade, for every one job created in the renewable sector, 5 jobs in the manufacturing sector have been destroyed. So, yes, there may be some new jobs coming online, but they're not as high paid as jobs, say, in mining, and they're not coming online in sufficient numbers to offset the massive unemployment that will result from the widespread closures of coal mines. So the issue is, it sounds good in theory, but when you're here on the ground and those jobs are going away, it means very little to those in the communities that rely on those jobs and those critical sectors.
Obviously, the argument for net zero emissions is about trying to curb the impacts of climate change, which could lead to massive economic costs, where we have increased in more disastrous weather events, we have prolonged droughts, more floods. All of those come with a cost. We're seeing that. That's clear in Queensland. We've got plenty of natural disasters that happen upon us, and if they're going to happen more often, there's a cost there as well. So what's the opportunity there to try to figure out the best balance of not incurring the wrath of climate change in Central Queensland and spending the money in a way that's going to still grow our economy?
Well, look, I have a slightly different perspective. If we're looking at the issue of emissions and climate change, then obviously that's at a global level. And so we need to look at emissions at a global level if we're talking about the matters that you've raised. And what we know is that Australia is only a very small contributor to total global emissions. We only contribute about 1% to global greenhouse gas emissions. China, by contrast, contributes about 30%. Or to put it a different way, every 16 days China emits more carbon than Australia does in one entire year. So the cost of wiping out our coal, our fossil fuels, our gas, our oil is immense, but the benefits are not there in terms of lower emissions on a global scale. So, if this is a global problem, it needs to be looked at a global level, but we should not be imposing this cost at a local level in North Queensland, which is what's happening.
How do you square off, though, that Australia emits more per capita than many other nations?
Well, we are a nation that relies on our resources sector and our fossil fuels. I mean, there's no doubt about that. It's a key employer. And it's not just about the economics of it. It also provides the revenue, through tax, through royalties, to fund critical social infrastructure that we all rely on, whether it's schools, hospitals or roads. So this gets beyond just the narrow economic or climate issue. It goes to our way of life. It goes to being an advanced first world economy that can provide such an outstanding opportunity and standard of living for its people. And so those are the issues we need to be considering.
I want to be clear about the language. I suppose when we talk about there would be no new projects, and we should be clear. Anthony Albanese has said that, look, if there's a coal mine application, if the environmental approvals stack up, they'd still be approving them. Certainly the LNP have said if they're buying, we're selling. So there's a commitment from both sides, and obviously, the actual reality and governance is another thing. But in terms of the rhetoric there, they're certainly committing to the idea that we're going to continue to be in these industries. So how does that square with a commitment to net zero?
Well, it's a good question, and I don't think it does. I don't think it does, and I don't think either the leader of the opposition or the Prime Minister are being honest with the Australian people about what net zero actually means. And by the way, I think the only party that is being honest is the Greens. The Greens have actually said what net zero means. They have said if Australia is going to do net zero properly, that means that we cannot have any new fossil fuel projects. That is the reality of it. If you want to get to net zero, you have to cut emissions. Now, I accept that there may be offsets and a variety of other things that can be implemented, but no one has explained, the Prime Minister or the Leader of the Opposition have not explained how, if we're going to get to net zero, we can still add in new fossil fuel projects. So my point is simply this. Net zero might sound like a good marketing slogan. It might sound nice and fuzzy, but once mainstream Australians understand what it means to their jobs, to their communities and to their way of life, they want nothing to do about it. And that is why net zero is absolutely toxic in North Queensland.
Just to put this to you, finally, the Prime Minister is in Rockhampton today. He'll be giving a speech. We understand that he'll be talking about a commitment to create 450,000 regional jobs. We hope we'll see a bit more detail in that, exactly what he means, what kind of jobs, what industries, how much of that is in central Queensland. What do you want to hear from that kind of talk?
Well, look, what I want to hear is for the coalition to abandon its commitment to net zero. It's clear what the costs are of net zero, and regional Australia and North Queensland deserves more than net zero hush money, because that's what this is. This is more money to keep North Queenslanders quiet while the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition are going to be out campaigning in the cities. The only thing that's going to unite Australians, the only thing that's going to secure our economic future is to scrap net zero, and that is what the Prime Minister must do today where he is in North Queensland.
Daniel Wild, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Pleasure, thank you.
Daniel Wild is the Director of Research at the Institute of Public Affairs. Certainly one strong position there. What do you make of it? 1300 837 222 if you want to be part of this. 1300 837 222. You can also text me 0487